So we have three panelists that'll be with us this afternoon, and I'll introduce them and they can just come up. The first is Miss Angela Jackson. She is a small business consultant in the Chicago area, and she also runs a tech firm on the side as well. And then we have Reverend Jonathan Brooks with us. He is the senior pastor of Canaan Community Church in Inglewood, Chicago on the south side. And then also with us, we have Miss Lydia Lewis. She is the program manager and director of small business development for the Black Chamber of Commerce of Lake County. Okay. So the first question I have is basically, I kind of said your title. People don't necessarily know what you do on a week-to-week basis. So just starting out, could each of you share some of the community development work you do in your various communities?
With the Black Chamber of Commerce as Director of Small Business Development, I work with entrepreneurs and established businesses to help them develop, grow, and enhance their businesses. As the Black Chamber of Commerce, we are unique as a chamber because we do more than just build our businesses. We also provide training in the community, the Lake County community. With the construction trades, we have small business training, we have weatherization, OSHA, and flagger training. So we're unique. It's all about growing our community to make it more vibrant.
Hi, my name is Angela Jackson, and I'm a small business consultant. I actually work with a couple different organizations, and normally that looks like working with a small business that is past the entrepreneur stage to help them grow and scale up, to not run out of cash, develop good internal systems, forecasting, et cetera. Then I also, through Entrepreneurity, if anyone's familiar with Brian Jenkins there, I help teach, facilitate classes through them, as well as coaching entrepreneurs, and that's in the South Loop area. And then lastly, I do, most of my volunteer work is with anti-trafficking things in Chicagoland, and that's through New Name, but also partnering with a couple different organizations. And within that, I've been able to help coach a couple women coming out of the industry to be able to get into the next step, whatever that is, in developing their own lives to help become more sustainable.
My name is Jonathan Brooks. Everybody knows me as Pastor J. From Chicago, Illinois, on the south side, Inglewood neighborhood. The church I pastor is Canaan Community Church. I've been engaged in community development formally, probably for about the last 9 to 10 years. What we do as a church is we try to be a model for partnership with local business as well as other small entrepreneurs, providing space, providing resources, also just being a connector between people in the community. So we've been responsible as main connectors for quite a few of the new businesses that have moved into Inglewood, as we see one of the few communities on the south side of Chicago that's having a resident-led renaissance. Rather than it being about gentrification, it's actually about community residents owning the changes that are happening in their own community. So recently, Whole Foods moved into our neighborhood, and that was through a partnership with Chicago Neighborhood Initiatives with David Doig, who came to me to connect with the neighborhood, and I was able to connect him with residents so that we could make actual demands on the Whole Foods as to how they would enter our community, including lowering the price point, hiring from within the community, the design of the store, as well as who the relations manager would be from within the community. We've also helped to start the first sit-down restaurant in Inglewood called the Kusanya Cafe. A member of the church had the vision. We sat down, became the fiscal agent for them as they began their journey, and then the church lended resources as in the form of human resources. We helped build the building. We helped dumpster dive and find benches and tables and do all the things that were necessary for the cafe, which has been open 3 years now to function. And so as a pastor, we see the church as one of God's greatest resources to the community, but we don't see the church as necessarily the leading perpetuator of new business. We see it as a resource to help businesses grow.
Actually, we were speaking earlier, and we were kind of discussing, some people, believers that love the Lord, really don't believe that the church should be engaged within community development, and that they only need to engage in teaching and preaching the Word of God, and not necessarily get involved in the area of community development, because in that way it'll lead to some kind of social gospel or lead to theological heresy of some form or way. And just even last week, I heard a pastor talking about this and saying that, the church don't need to be doing social action. If people in the church want to do that, that's fine. But the church, as an institution, shouldn't be doing that. How would y'all, respond to that? Or what role do you think the church should play in helping the community develop?
Ultimately, my response to that is a multifaceted response, typically, but I'm going to try to hone in on kind of one aspect just as a springboard for us today as we talk about it. The number one reason why the church must be engaged in social action and must be engaged in community development is because the gospel that we believe is a holistic gospel. First and foremost, if we believe that God is only concerned about creating spaces in the someday for our disembodied souls to rest, then we have missed the message that Jesus was portraying in the fact that a human being named Jesus Christ walked the earth, right? That God enveloped himself in human flesh and did not come down for a few months just to die real quick and then go back, but stayed for 3 decades and made sure that not only was the word of God being expressed about our spiritual needs and our desires, but also that when people came to him with physical needs, with social needs, with mental needs, with political questions, that Jesus responded and answered. A matter of fact, when he was sitting at on the beach, as I like to say, and a group of folks were following him around, and the disciples are saying, Jesus, these folks love to hear you preach. They love to hear you preach, and they want to go where you're going to preach, but they're hungry. We don't know what to do. Jesus doesn't say, I don't care if they're hungry. They need the gospel. They need to be saved. So let them die of hunger while they listen, because all they need is the word of God to nourish them. No, he said, feed them. And here's the important part of that statement. That created a dilemma, because they did not have enough for everyone to eat. And so Jesus' solution to the dilemma is not, okay, I'll introduce pizza right now. No, he tells his disciples, go see what the people actually have already, which is the core of community development. What do people already have as a resource? And they bring that resource. All they could find is the only person prepared for the trip was the least likely person. A kid who packed a little lunch, 2 fish sticks and some white bread, right? Like, we're going with Jesus, I'm gonna pack a lunch. The only person prepared was the least likely person to be prepared, the last person they would have asked. And here's what I love about what happens in this passage. Jesus does not take these 2 fish and say, God, make this enough. It literally says that he lifts it up and thanks God for what they have. Thank you for what we have. And then he says, feed the folks. And at the end of the day, you got everybody eating, and then you got 12 baskets full left over for those doubting disciples who didn't think this would be enough. And so I say that to say that it is overwhelmingly important that the church, as the institution that is God's example of how we are to live in the world, that we recognize our responsibility not only to save souls in heaven for the someday, but to feed people's entire lives and to help them to realize that the gospel is good news for everyone. The good news for the blind person was not that one day you'll go to heaven, it was you can see. The good news for the woman with the issue of the blood was not, oh, I know you got an issue, but don't worry, God will fix it in heaven. It was, your faith has made you whole. All right? And if we continue to bifurcate the gospel, we continue one of the worst tragedies that has ever happened in Christian history. The reason why slaveholders in antebellum slavery could bring their slave and sit them next to themselves in a church service because they needed Jesus was because they could bifurcate the fact that I own your physical body, but God only wants to redeem your soul. And unless we want to continue down that road, we have to discontinue the bifurcation of the gospel. The gospel is holistic. It is good news in every aspect. And so the church has to be the leaders in championing this view that unless we care about the whole person, then we actually miss the gospel of Jesus Christ.
Sometimes in churches I've grown up in, I've felt like the pastor and the staff board sat around and decided, what are we going to do as a church to like help our community? And then they would do it, and then they would be really shocked that didn't work. And eventually, for me also, it dawned on like, why don't you figure out like what do the people have, like what resources do they have, and develop those giftings. And so and everyone's different and everyone has passions, but if you don't ask what they are, then they're not going to come out. So I appreciate you saying that.
Begging for volunteers, right?
Right.
My view on that and my belief is this, that Jesus Christ is everywhere.
Amen.
He's in economic development. He's throughout every aspect of your life. He is there. There was a time years ago, my parents, my grandparents, the church was it. When there was any challenges, any problems, any issues, economic development issues, they went to the church. The church is a very, very vital, important aspect in every community because that's Jesus Christ and he loved everyone. So economic development is very important,
Yes, it is.
whether it's in the church or not,
Amen.
because Jesus loves everyone. And I think it's a tremendous reward and very gratifying as far as your faith in God. And it's in everything that you do.
That's right. That's right.
Some cultures it's different, but the first independent institution that the Black community had was the church. That was the first institution that we were able to run independent of the dominant culture.
Right.
So the church had to be everything to Black communities because we didn't have resources in education and business. So the church was the one, the pastor was the one empowering the congregation to enter into those things. So some communities have the privilege of not having that history in a sense, so they can bifurcate in a way that other groups really don't. That leads me on to my next question. We were speaking earlier about how sometimes, and it's good to have nonprofits involved in community development, but sometimes they can create almost a source of dependency for the communities. And Angela in particular was talking about how a lot of businesses are starting like social enterprise and trying to help people in communities develop profitable businesses. So then they don't have to depend on the government or a nonprofit for funding of organizations, and so that they can be a part of becoming self-sustainable, basically. So I was gonna ask, what role do you think for-profit businesses can play or should play in economic development?
The nonprofits in our community are wonderful organizations. But I do agree that nonprofits are there to provide assistance and self-sufficiency for sustainability. They are not they should not be used as a tool to just keep sustaining you. We help you to correct the issues so that you can be self-sufficient. And the nonprofits that I'm involved with, the Chamber is a nonprofit. We also have family housing services where we provide rehab and renovation to the low-income communities and some homeowner occupied so that they can have a safe, decent, healthy place, environment to live in. We also have a nonprofit that's a Small Business and Contractors Academy. That nonprofit helps entrepreneurs, established businesses, startups to grow, build, and sustain their own businesses. Because you have a lot of individuals in the community that have, felony convictions. You have some that are reentry individuals, and the best thing for them to do is to start their own businesses because they have wonderful ideas and concepts. So we help them to create their business plan and teach them all of the tools to manage their businesses from A to Z. Nonprofits are good, but nonprofits are all there to serve a purpose for whatever specific targeted population that they're there for. And that's what they do. But they don't want to keep, dealing with the same clients if they don't have to, depending on what kind of nonprofit you are. But nonprofits are meant to serve that purpose for self-sufficiency and sustainability so that you can be a vital, productive citizen.
And I might get a little bit too practical and deep in the weeds, but that's kind of what I do for my job. So in thinking about what is a nonprofit versus what is a for-profit, and because of the terrible name, we think that nonprofits are not supposed to be profitable, right? So the term not-for-profit is just a tax designation. That's all it is. It means you don't have to pay taxes on your income, which is awesome. Taxes suck the lifeblood out of businesses at times, but so it does not mean that you're not supposed to be profitable, right? When you pull business statements, every month your income, it looks exactly the same, right? At the end of the month, how much money did you have if you paid all your bills? That doesn't mean it's going into the CEO's pocket or the executive director. Like that means you have money to reinvest into your business, right? Like the point of your business, whether it's for profit or profit, is you have a mission and you have some sort of purpose. And believe me, I work with for-profit businesses that have sometimes even greater missional reasons for why they're doing it. But they just can't actually get a nonprofit status, okay? So at the end of the day, they know that if I am more profitable, I can grow and I can actually reach more people with what I'm doing. So that's the same concept that has to carry over into a nonprofit or into a social enterprise. So that's kind of the new fad trendy word, right? Social enterprise, because yes, like let's go into a community that has a substantial need, and let's make a socially minded business that is kind of a nonprofit, but not really. It's also a for-profit. And I've been able to work with a lot of those businesses. And believe me, like that's my heart. I want to be able to help create sustainable business models for survivors of human trafficking. All about it. What I have found that you run into, especially with those coming from perhaps a Bible seminary background, and that was also my background to an extent as well, is that you get caught up in, well, we have to focus so much on the mission, and the money part doesn't matter, right? So like the financial statements and the person the accountant, that's just something on the side. Like, let's not really focus on that. And unfortunately, over time, like if you don't do that, it's okay when you're really small, but if you double in size, if you triple in size, that becomes a massive problem. And the problem with that is there's a reason business can be sustainable if they're run well, right? Because business, cash is flowing right, and you're able to hire more people. If it's not working well, you can't do those things. You can't hire more people. Money is not going out through the business and being used, right? So if you're trying to be a social enterprise, but your costs are so high because the people you are employing to help, that's part of your mission, you're letting them not stay to standards, right? Because yes, they need to go from, they come in at a very difficult point. Maybe they've never had a real job before, and they have to go from A to B. But in your mindset to try to help them, they stay at A. and they end up sucking your resources. And so what I have found sometimes with social enterprises is that we're like, well, no, we can't really implement, we can't become a factory or like a business, because then that's like moving away from our mission, and we're supposed to have a safe place for these people and, whatever. But if at the end of the day, if your business shut down, will those people be able to go and get another job? Probably not, because they became dependent on your social enterprise. And so was that social enterprise all about you? Was it all about you being able to hire some people and prove you guys are doing a good job? So all that said, when you approach, if you have a passion for a group of people or something that you were able, from your past, that is awesome. Don't want to kill that. Make sure you partner with somebody that has perhaps a background or understanding of what does a sustainable business model look like. If you're in church leadership, which the first time to Trinity, by the way, so I'm starting to learn more about students here. I know there's a lot of seminary going on. My dad was a pastor, so I'm a huge fan. But yes, points. And my pastor is Charlie Dates, which I'm like, he's famous here, right? So if you're in a church that wants to do community development, keep that in mind. Remember that you're going to be looking at business from a pastoral standpoint and not from a business executive standpoint. And it's not bad, right? It's not a wrong. We need both sides. But bring partners into your business that you are going to let them guide you. Because the hardest thing is to run into pastoral leadership that already knows what to do. And so, you kind of want to help, but it's hard to, you got to be the bad guy sometime. So kind of to encapsulate, with social enterprises, remember it's not about you. It's not about what you're starting. It's really about the people that you're creating. So if you are bringing people in from whether a marginalized or a disabled community, that it needs to be centered around them and getting them to a place that they can leave, right? They can leave yours and they can go be a better person.
But as a pastor involved in community development, I'm here to let you know that she is exactly right. Pastors are not business people. We just are not. That is not our lane. It is not our expertise. How many taking business classes in seminary? Right? That's not. But yet, because the church has problems with following, and we think that we should always be leading, we find ourselves leading things into the ground. And so I would honestly say that this year our church theme or motto is the power of with. And what I've done is I've tried to help my church recognize that every sentence changes if you add the word with as a clarifier. So rather than serving our community, now we're serving with our community. Completely different sentence, which means that serving with might mean that we're not in the leadership here because we're not the experts. What we are is a resource to the expert who knows about business. And you say, what is it that we can do to be of support to you as you incubate business and as it grows? Churches, in many aspects, especially if they're not community-minded, are actually poor business models. Right? Because what we do is we pull the greatest resources any community has out of it most of the time, because we preach a gospel that says that, be as upwardly mobile as you can and get it out of tough situations. But especially in the Black church, many of our churches are in the most impoverished communities. And so our folks drive into those churches, look down on the people who are still stuck in the community, and then go back out to where we've moved up to. And so we've actually inbred a capacity to say we're going to pull the resources out. They were not going to pay property taxes. They were only going to have our church open on Sunday and Wednesday. And then, so we're actually not the best business model. And so in that case, we need to think about how we can accompany it. And I was sharing with them in the room that I've been telling the church I grew up in for years, you got this big building, this big educational building you built in the 80s, 70s, or 80s, and it's empty. I'm like, just open it up for shared business offices. You got a secretary that sits in the church and does nothing pretty much all day. Let her be the shared secretary for all these beautiful spaces that you have. And it's income for the church, and you don't have to run anything. We just need to be a resource, right? Space is the number one resource we have, but also connections. So I am 100% of the mindset that the church needs to learn how to follow. To all those church leaders, aspiring church leaders, and present church leaders, Sometimes the best leadership model is to be the best follower when it's not your expertise. Okay? And so to me, for-profit business is one of the most important things that the church can be engaged in, but we need to let people who know how to do that lead it and let us be a resource.
Hearing you guys talk about this makes me think a lot about my grandfather. My grandfather was from the South, from Arkansas area, grew up in a very poor sharecropping family. Got about a 7th grade education, and he moved north and started his own concrete pouring business and became an entrepreneur and got a lot of government contracts and was, able to, buy multiple homes, buy a farmhouse. So I know the capacity of entrepreneurship to lift a family out of poverty. And even how much that meant to his church, because he was a minister within that church. And thankfully, he was blessed with 6 sons to pour the concrete, so he had in-house staff. Resources. But just hearing you guys talk, last week we talked about education, and I'm always thinking, even like, I noticed in a lot of communities, even in Chicago, a lot of the businesses aren't owned by the actual people that live within those communities. And I've been thinking a lot, how do we develop people that might have not even received a good quality of education in their community to become entrepreneurs and business owners in a community when they might not have that educational level where they don't have that knowledge base? How do you help people get to that point where they can start taking ownership in their communities?
That's kind of, most entrepreneurs are like that, where they're really good at one thing, and so they find that there's a place in the market, there's something missing, there's a gap, and so they decide to step into that, and they have no idea what they're doing besides the fact that they can do this one thing really well. I'm a really good designer, or I'm a really good concrete pourer, whatever. So, you don't have to do it all by yourself. And sometimes entrepreneurs get this founder syndrome that it's all about me, and like I have to carry this, and it's all my burden. It's not. So just be willing to ask for help. There's a lot of really great organizations like Entrenuity is starting up now, Sunshine Ministries in Chicago that have incubators, and there's some socially minded, there's some not faith-based that are excellent. And if you care about it, put your money where your mouth is and pay for it and go be a part of it. We talked about value earlier too. You value what you pay for. And it's the same for you. Don't start something where you have everything for free, because no one's really going to value that service. So in a way, be able to, whether it's money or not, have people that can trade value for the service. But yeah, so some of these incubators can be in the evenings, one time a week for 8 weeks, right? And you'll meet other entrepreneurs that are in the same struggle. So it's just like community, don't do it alone.
So I'm on a college campus, I'm about to say this. But anyway, I have degrees, so don't take this the wrong way. But I do want to say to us, and this is one of the things we talk about in my congregation because it's extremely diverse as far as education level is concerned. The notion that you have to be formally educated in order to do anything is a very European epistemology. It's not something that the rest of the world recognizes. That you got to sit in somebody's room and be told by an expert before you're able to get a piece of paper which tells you can go out and do something. I'm glad your grandfather didn't believe that, right? The truth of the matter is that we just have to empower people to know that they have gifts. It is that question of what do the people have rather than what have they done, have they met the requirements? And so what we have to do as a church is we have to empower people to help them recognize that society might tell us there is a formal way of you being successful, but God has already told us that we have everything we need to be successful. Okay? And so we have to empower people. Now, am I saying that people shouldn't get educated? Am I saying that people shouldn't go through trainings and things? No. What I am saying is that should never prohibit anyone from moving forward in what they feel like God has called them to do, whether that's in business, whether it's in ministry, whether it's in raising a family or any of that. And so what I don't want us to do is to fall prey to the notion, especially those of us who are formally educated, that unless you've done that, you're not ready to move into the capacity in which you may feel yourself. So I want to dismantle that a bit and just say that, guys, that's not even American, it's European. And people for centuries have been doing amazing things without going to school. So let's just remember that, and let's empower one another, and let's ask people what they already have, and then lift it up to God and say, God, thank you for what we have, and then send people on their way. All right, so that's just my 2 cents.
And that'll actually also be a benefit. And, like seriously, competitive advantage. If you don't know what you're doing, you're going to think differently. You're going to see other ways to solve problems instead of following the system.
I agree that you do not need a formal education to be an entrepreneur. If you have a passion for something,
That's right.
then you move forward with that. Most entrepreneurs are afraid to take that risk. But as a believer in God, all things are possible.
That's right.
So don't ever be afraid of failure. A lot of the millionaires today have failed multiple times before they come to be at the level that they are. So if you believe in you believe in God and your passion, then you move forward. But I think the biggest challenge with startups, entrepreneurs, they do not know where to tap into those resources. You can always go to your local chambers, your city hall. They should always have a business development department. Or you can go to your local colleges because they always have that small business development center. So the resources are there. But if you have a passion for what you want to do, do it. Let no one stop you from moving forward. As long as you have God in the mix, you can't go wrong.
A little nuanced. I think the other thing, though, is too, and this is where I think we really have a responsibility, is, and Helen, not Helen, I'm sorry, Angela. I was looking at the lady here, and then Helen. Hi, Helen. One thing Angela talked about was how to use the money responsibly. And I think one of the things that I've been thinking about is the wealth gap, and especially not just the wealth gap, in like race and gender and all those things, because that's important, but also the wealth gap in like CEO to worker. And so that notion is where I think we step in when people become business owners and start businesses, that they don't fall hook, line, and sinker into this capitalistic notion of like working your workers to death for a little bit of money so that you can continue to go up, but that you do pour back into your business. And that means pouring back into your resource, your main resource, your human resources on a greater level. So if we can diminish that gap, CEOs should not be making 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 times as much as their workers. It's just ridiculous. And then I think also the other part of that is to make sure that we teach that even if you are like a person who says that I'm a capitalist or I believe in capitalism and I'm totally for it. I know there's usually a myriad of views about that in rooms. A friend of mine, Bob Lupton from Atlanta, has FCS Urban Ministries coined this phrase, what he calls responsible capitalism. And just this notion that capitalism cannot be your end goal. It has to be the help, support of your community and the people around you. It has to be your end goal. So I think that's where we, as people of a greater moral barometer, who know that we are slaves to Christ and have to have another greater standard, we have to step in as we come alongside and partner with people in business. So.
Yeah, the wealth gap is very large in the United States, and I was actually reading an article that was talking about the difference between the CEO versus the lower paid worker. In the 1960s, it was saying in the United States it was about 1 to 60. Now it's 1 to 400. And the next country, the second country is 1 to 100. So America is like the first by like far. The gap between the highest paid worker and the lowest paid worker. And I think they were looking at even Walmart, so there's a big gap between executives at large companies like that and the lowest paid workers are extremely large. And also there's wealth gaps between communities, we know, in Chicago. So I was gonna ask, because some people, I'm sure in this room, go to churches in areas that are developed, or maybe, I don't know how to phrase it, but they're not thinking about trying to get people jobs. They're not thinking about educational resources, because those communities have been given a lot of resources. What role do you think those areas or churches in those areas or people that serve in leadership in churches in those communities could play potentially in partnering with other communities? If any role, but yeah.
Here comes that scary Christian community development word. The second R, which is called redistribution. That's the one that a lot of people go, oh, Lord, they've become socialists. But when we talk about redistribution and the components of Christian community development, we're not talking about communism. We're not talking about Robin Hood stealing from the rich and giving to the poor. It's not the mindset here. The mindset is that we all have a wealth of resources that can be shared, not just in a top-down way, but also in a very reciprocal way. And so when you think about the opportunity to share resources, whether that's relationships, whether that's money, whether that's knowledge, whether that's infrastructure, then those are opportunities also to gain relationship with someone who lives and works and serves and understands the world in a totally different way than you. And so now your eyes get open to a whole nother way of living. And so this whole idea of partnership that I really hinge on becomes important, especially when we're talking about from demographic to demographic or community to community. That we recognize that it is important that we not only turn inwardly on ourselves when we, especially when we're talking about business or in any aspect, but that we recognize unless all of us are thriving, then really none of us are thriving. And so that web that we need to weave, that tapestry that we need to put together, actually permeates through every area, whether we're talking about ministry or whether we're talking about just business sectors. So what I would like to say is I would like to see people of good faith really pushing the envelope for people who have done well in business or who have received far more resources and it was easier to start business where they were to reach out across. But I would also like to see them not just reach out across that way, but to also have people who are struggling and are in communities where it's a heart of a time to create business. Our cafe, the typical timeline for a cafe in the city is 3 to 6 months to open. It took us 5 years. And there are tons of factors that contribute to that. But we would have benefited from someone maybe from North Shore coming and saying, oh, I have a contractor who would do that for this price because they've done it 1,000,000 times. It's no big deal, versus us having to find someone who would, right? Or someone who knew somebody that works for ComEd so that the ComEd person wouldn't come and say, unless that's a paved ground, I cannot stand there. And so she wouldn't put the box in. And so we were like, can we just put a board there? And she was like, that's not good enough. You have to reschedule. And it took 6 more months for ComEd to come back out to put the box in for us to have power, right? But somebody has connections with ComEd that could say, oh, no, somebody can lose a job unless this happens now. Those are the differences between businesses starting in 6 months and 6 years, right? It's who you know in relationships. So when we talk about redistribution, that's what we mean. We mean sharing of relationships, of power, of influence, of money, of whatever we have, and recognizing that we also now get a relationship with another organization and another community and another person. So I just wanted to say that it should be reciprocal as well.
I agree with you, Pastor Jay, in reference to redistribution. Shared resources, whether it's religious, business, economic development, it's always better.
That's right.
Because one group of people know a lot of other people that you don't know. They have a lot of other resources that you don't have. And just think how great it would be if we all shared our resources. That way, everyone is being taken care of. So I think it's a wonderful thing about resources, the redistribution. And no one is better than another person. We're all the same in the eyes of God. Okay? So, oh, sorry. But redistribution is very important.
An article published by, I think, the Urban Institute or some research-based organization, and it was about Chicago. And the article basically was making this argument by not like helping other communities that are struggling, you're hurting the whole city. You're losing money in taxes, you're losing money. So they're like, we're not even gonna try to talk about individual communities now. We need to convince the people with resources how you're hurting yourself and how you're hurting the tax base of your own city by not helping out these struggling areas, by not helping improve the education, by not helping improve issues with crime and other things, and not developing businesses in, under-resourced communities, you're hurting your own city, you know what I mean? You don't feel as safe because you're kind of creating these wealth gaps. It's not good to have large wealth gaps in a city, And
you're also perpetuating that narrative that says that that's all that those communities are, right? Like you're naming them by their worst characteristics. And so therefore, now it brings fear on you to even work with people in those communities or even drive through them, let alone work with them. So unless we actually reach across and begin to get in relationship with one another, we'll never find out the truth about the other person or the other spaces. And we'll only live off of this incomplete narrative of a place or a person. And same thing for poorer communities, because I'm going to tell you, you talk about North Shore and all these places to people from Inglewood, they're going to go, everybody's rich, everybody's bougie, everybody, and y'all like, what? No, that's not true, right? So both are incomplete narratives that, unless relationship happens, will continue and perpetuate, and people won't reach across, they won't do it.
I went to a church years ago, and the pastor was a phenomenal speaker, and great theological exegesis, that kind of stuff. Like, here we go, drop that. And he was wonderful. I felt like he was great. And I remember he said at one point in a sermon that this church is only as strong as its weakest member, right? And the entire church was 1,000 people of white, and everybody had at least a bachelor's, if not a PhD, master's degree. And they were in relation to just a few miles from very poor parts of the city in South Carolina, right? And that like slowly began a journey for myself, but it was in that sense that I think a lot of churches outside of the city can have these really solid theological beliefs that have no practical application outside of the club. And so for me, like living in the heads and now, trying to reintegrate myself in different ways, it's been a great learning experience. And I've come to learn so much that like I'm gaining so much more from widening my boundaries and actually getting rid of the boundaries, hopefully. And there's a reason Jesus said, "Blessed are the poor in spirit." And it's amazing when you think you're like, well, let me go and interact with the poor. You find out you're really poorer, and you're even just as broken, if not more. And you've been questioning everything you've ever learned. So I would just say for those that are in churches and, like you're planted, you're a student, it's hard to like travel to the South Side. You have to just be, you have the resources to be really creative. So, be really creative.
Yeah, and that's great because I was thinking even reading that article, this article basically saying like this is our new technique to argue that it hurts the whole community. And I was like, it's funny, that's a new idea, right? You know, didn't the Bible talk about that? We're all part of the same body, and when one part hurts, another part hurts too. And I think in a lot of ways, we've shut ourselves off from that and haven't thought in that communal sense as the body of believers. And this secular organization is even picking up on that idea that really should be deeply rooted in the church.